Hello everyone, welcome to Eternal Basics. My name is Pojo, and this is the most important card in Eternal. It's called Seek Power. We're going to be talking a lot about why it's important and why many other cards similar to it are important as we talk about power and influence, building a Combrei beatdown deck. First things first, we're going to look at the deck list, and then we're going to talk about how to support that deck list with power. Alright, let's go to it. Alright, so today we're going to be playing a Combrei Heroes deck, and the basic idea behind it is to play a lot of fast, simple units. We're going to be playing a tempo style, similar to the green deck that we played previously, where we're highly focused on weapons and also on units with useful abilities that have a lot of benefit from those weapons. In particular, one of the core cards of this deck is Hero of the People, which says that whenever you play a unit, Hero of the People gains its battle skills, and it has +1/+1 for each of her battle skills. We'll put a link or an importable deck list in the doobly-doo down below, and of course you'll be able to import that if you want to, but I will also go over each card in turn. We've already talked about Gilded Glaive and why it's powerful, a flexible, wonderful weapon. We have 4 of them in this deck because we are playing heavy weapons. Our other weapon is Vodakhan's Staff, a hybrid card, which is quite powerful due to its inability to be destroyed. If you get it into the void and you have 8 or more power, you get to draw it back, which is very relevant for making all of your later game units extremely useful, if you can get to that 8 power. So that's something that we're going to have to consider when we put the deck together. There's one other power-dependent card in this set, which is, again, a hybrid card, Awakened Student, which gives +1/+1 whenever we play a power card from our hand. So this card can be played on 2 as a 2/2, or it can be played on 3 as a 2/2, and then given a +1/+1 with your extra power, which can make it pretty effective. It is a very good card for getting really huge, and something that your opponent has to deal with eventually, or else it's just going to become really valuable for its cost. Alright. We also have Protect, of course, to make sure that the units that we have with weapons on are getting perfect amounts of protection. There's 4 of them in the deck. That's pretty relevant due to the fact that it's useful with Hero of the People. If we give Hero of the People an Aegis, then Hero of the People gets +1/+1 in addition to the Aegis, which is always nice. And it's also useful with our weapons, because being able to protect our weapons from being silenced, and protect them from being destroyed, and protect the creatures the units who are carrying the weapons is all really important. We have 4 Seek Power, of course. The number of power in the deck is 26, but the Seek Power effectively brings it up to 30, which means that we actually have a pretty sizable amount of extra power in the deck. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, of course, Crownwatch Paladin, an extremely good 2-drop that we've already got, so we're happy to include it in the deck. This hybrid card, Desert Marshal, is a very good card to craft if you're going into a Combrei deck. It's got the Summon, Silence, and Other Unit ability, which is very good for problem solving, and combined with its Ambush makes it an extremely powerful card at Uncommon. This is a really good 2-drop that is very hard to deal with, and it's very good for getting a lot of early aggression out of your opponent's hand. For the later game aggression, we have cards like Vanquish, which kills a unit with 4 power or more, and Scorpion Wasp, which is a deadly creature with ambush that you simply drop down in front of a unit and it immediately kills it. It's a very good way to fight off opponents in other fashions. So, in addition, we've also got Silverwing Familiar, a common source of Gilded Glaives and Vodakhan Staffs. This card loves being equipped more than anything else, and if you play it after you play a Hero of the People, you get a 4/4 flying lifesteal Aegis, which is a heck of a good deal. We also have Ancient Lore. This is just covering our bases a little bit. We know that this deck can play out a lot of units very fast, so we want to be able to draw a little bit of extra gas later on, so we're running 2 of those. And finally, Karmic Guardian, a flying lifesteal endurance 1/4. This card interacts very well with Hero of the People, and it also interacts very well with weapons. So we get to have like a really big, very difficult to stun unit that is quite good at stealing a lot of health and flying over your opponent's head, and remains as a blocker. So yeah, lots of good things going on there. Finally, we have the late game cards of Rolant's Honor Guard and Rolant the Iron Fist, since they were included in the Hand of Justice deck, and they support our almost entirely green unit base extremely well. Rolant only gives endurance to green units, but pretty much with the exception of Scorpion Wasp, all of our units are green. So we have a pretty decent reason to include that legendary and have a little fun with that Scion at 8 power, especially since we have a couple of tricks at 8 power that we're kind of interested in getting to. Okay, so that's the deck list. Now let's talk about power and influence. All card games, and indeed most strategy games, have an element of randomness to them, where you can sometimes be betrayed by how many cards you draw of what type. When it comes to games like Eternal, we want to reduce that level of randomness by as much as possible. And when we do this, we are more likely to have consistent games where we play our strategy to the best of our ability. This means that we get to have more fun, and it also means that we get to win more. And that's pretty important. It's especially important when we're considering power and influence, because there are three specific, extremely bad things that can happen to us when it comes to power. The first is power screw, where we draw so little power that we can't play the rest of our deck. So if we draw only 2 power for the entire game, it doesn't matter how many good cards we are drawing. We've only got access to this much of our deck, the parts that cost only 2. That means that we don't get access to a large portion of our strategy, and it means that we're very likely to lose the game. The second problem is the inverse of that, what we call power flood. Now, power flood is when you draw so much power that you drown out all of your other cards. You simply draw more power than you could possibly need, and as a result, you're not playing effective threats onto the board, and you're not playing cards that are very, very helpful to you. So if we draw, say, 13 or 14 of our 24 power and we don't draw any other cards that are actually playable, our opponent may be running an aggro deck and just kill us because we didn't play anything out onto the board. That's an example of power flood at its most extreme. The final thing that can happen is what we call influence lock, and this is a similar form of power screw. It's mostly exclusive to hybrid decks, but it can happen in monocolored decks, and the basic idea behind it is that you aren't able to play cards in your deck, like Karmic Guardian or Ancient Lore, because you don't have enough influence of the particular type. You'll see that Ancient Lore and Karmic Guardian both require 2 time, so if I draw 7 Justice Sigils and only 1 Time Sigil during my time playing a game, then I'm not going to be able to play either of these cards at 4, which can lead to very, very awkward turns and very, very awkward hands. That kind of thing can really lose you a game, and it's pretty important to try and mitigate that as much as possible. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we can do this. The most important one, of course, is Seek Power, and the reason why we consider Seek Power to be such a powerful card is because it addresses all 3 of these issues in different ways. Now, first off, it manages power screw significantly because you are effectively adding power to your deck when you add a Seek Power. You have a much higher chance of drawing that power, and you're also going to be essentially like playing out the power of your choice. So because this deck has 26 power at the moment, and it also has 4 Seek Power, it's running effectively 30 power, which is pretty good for making sure that we get to at least 4, and that means we're going to be able to play almost all of our deck pretty much all of the time. In addition, it's pretty likely we're going to be getting to like the 7s or 8s pretty late in the game, because we're probably pretty likely to be drawing more power than that. But we should be pretty well in that sweet spot. Now, the second thing that Seek Power does is it thins out your deck by drawing power out of your deck. So it gets you power when you need it, but it also makes sure that there's less power in your deck for later, which helps to manage that power flood issue. Because we are removing power from our deck, we are also making sure that there is less of it to draw later when we don't need it as much. And this is a pretty important concept. A Seek Power is actually 2 power played from your deck, but it's only worth 1. So as a result, we actually reduce the amount of power that is in the deck overall, which can be really, really relevant. If you include multiple ways to seek out from your deck, you can actually get rid of almost all of the power in your deck very, very quickly. And as a result, you'll be drawing nothing but good cards, and you'll already have all of the power that you need to play them. So there are a lot of different ways to seek out power, and we'll talk about those probably in just a little bit. But of course, the final thing about Seek Power is that it allows you to choose whatever sigil you want as far as basic power goes. That means Justice Time, Shadow, Primal, or of course the other one, Fire. Yeah, so the other one. Anyways, yeah, this means that we manage influence lock a lot better because we are always picking the power that's most appropriate to the cards that we are playing. Seek Power gives us choices, and if you're not running 4 of them in your deck, it's very likely that you're probably going to deserve it when one of these things happens to you. Sometimes it'll happen anyways, but it's a pretty good idea whenever you're building a hybrid deck to make sure that 4 Seek Power are in that deck, because this is a way that your deck is going to solve all 3 of those problems and get you into a much more consistent position. So pay attention to that card, make sure to play it. Direwolf in particular wants you to play it, and they know that it's a good card. You can tell this by going into my cards and looking at your collection. So you'll notice that all of the colorless cards are normally in the back, like way back here. But if you remove the filters, you'll notice that Seek Power is actually not in the back here. It's up in the front. So if let's go ahead and go back up there. Yep, right there. This card wants to be played. Be sure to play it. It's even good in monocolored decks. It's actually extremely good in monocolored decks if you need 29 power. And there's a specific reason for that. People have gone over the math, and it actually increases your chances of getting the power that you need in the colors that you need by a few percentage points. It's pretty important to consider using this instead of just adding power to your deck. Now, the only reason why we wouldn't run a card like Seek Power is if we were running a deck like that Rakano deck that we ran previously, which is very fast and doesn't want to play more than 25 power at all. When that happens, we switch to a card called Diplomatic Seal, which helps us fix that influence issue, but doesn't require us to include extra power in the deck. So essentially, we only have 25 cards in the deck that are power, but as a result, the seal helps us fix for it. So that's the basic idea behind that one Rakano aggro deck, but most other hybrid decks, for Seek Power, be sure to run it. And that's, the main takeaway that I want to take away from this video. I think it's absolutely important. Okay, let's look at a couple of these other Seek cards, and then we'll go into a game. Some cards we've talked about quite frequently are the favors, of course. Caleb's Favored, Taler's Favored, Roland's Favor, Island's Favor, and Vara's Favor. These cards are unique in that they don't fix one type of power screw, which is the influence screw. They will not allow you to get a power of a different color so that you can get both of your factions into your particular deck. But they do make it easier to hit double or triple influence requirements, and they're also very good at thinning out your deck the same way that Seek Power cards do, as well as providing you with small amounts of advantage. Make no mistake, these cards are extremely strong, and most of them fit very well into any deck that is monocolored or that has a particularly strong influence one way or the other. Vara's Favor in particular is so good that it should be in pretty much any shadow deck, even a hybrid deck. That 1 damage with lifesteal tends to be extremely relevant. It can function as a removal spell all in and of itself while redrawing you a Shadow Sigil, and if you can put all of that stuff together, Vara's Favor is incredible. I highly recommend it. The other ones are a little bit less effective sometimes. Roland's Favor tends to be used mostly in decks that run weapons. Taler's Favored is quite strong as a body, but there are a lot of different options in yellow that allow you to get sigils. Island's Favor is quite amazing as a sideboard card due to that Aegis effect being extremely relevant, and Caleb's Favor is quite fun in any red deck that wants to go past the aggro stage. If you can actually get into the late game in red, then Caleb's Favor is a card for you because that extra damage is actually very relevant. It's just a matter of whether or not you want to get into the late game cards. Now, Secret Pages is a simple card that allows you to draw a sigil of your choice from your deck. It costs more than Seek Power, which is fairly important. The thing about Seek Power that makes it especially good is that it's playable on turn 1, and there aren't that many really good 1-drops on turn 1 that you want to be playing. So as a result, Seek Power rarely provides any sort of disadvantage to you in terms of tempo. But Secret Pages does the opposite of this. It requires that you sacrifice some tempo in order to draw the sigil of your choice from your deck. But it gives you extra card advantage by making sure that you have more of those sigils than anybody else. This is a really good way to thin out a control deck. I think this card is extremely powerful if you're playing a very, very slow deck, and it's definitely worth considering. Another good one, if you are looking for something that has a little bit more tempo, is the Amber Acolyte, which is draw a sigil of your choice from your deck. Time has access to a lot of good ways to draw sigils, and this one is one of the better ones. So this has that same Seek Power thinning effect. It also provides you with a small body to block with, which can be very, very relevant. This is a pretty important card as far as making sure that you are fixing things. It's also worth going over the banners and seats. We want to play banners in any situation where we have a lot of small units. They're very good for making sure that we meet our heavy influence requirements. And if we really need to meet very, very heavy influence requirements, say if we need to get, 3 red and 3 green for an Icaria, or 4 blue for a Channel the Tempest, including banners in addition to your seats is a really, really good idea. We're not going to do it in this deck because really our requirements aren't that steep. We have Rolant the Iron Fist at the top, and Karmic Guardian is a little bit steep at 4, but in the early game we don't actually have anything that requires any amount of extra influence beyond 2 colors. And you have Gilded Glaive, but for the most part you're good. So the banners would just slow us down a little bit, and we don't really see a need to put them in for this deck. However, seats are always good. Seats are an extremely good way to run if you have enough power to make sure that they are rarely depleted. They will very rarely slow you down, they will usually fix for all of your power, and I highly recommend including 4 of them in any hybrid deck. That's it for the power seeking. Let's get into the game, shall we? Alright, so let's see here. Right away, we've got a decent start. We've got 2 green sigils, and Seek Power gets us the time sigil that we need. Trying to get to 3 power is exactly what we're looking for. Rolant's Honor Guard is, of course, a card that we're not going to be able to play very early on, but I think with Crownwatch, Paladin, and Gilded Glaive, that looks like a really strong starter hand. So, there's a theory in Eternal and Magic called stock mana theory, or stock power. So, and the idea behind it is that you are trying to spend all of your power efficiently every turn. So, like right now, we have 1 power available, and we're spending 1 power to get an effect. And anytime that we don't spend that power, it's sort of considered to be wasted power, and the person who wastes the least power is the person who's most likely to win the game. So, to that extent, we're going to be trying to waste as little power as possible. That's one of the things that Gilded Glaive in particular excels at. So we're pretty happy about that. But, we also want to play most of our stuff on curve. That's why it's important to usually have that 3rd power in the hand if we can get it. It means that we're able to play our 3 drops, which are our 2nd most common cards, basically precisely on schedule. And if we do that with cards like Gilded Glaive, we have a pretty good chance of pushing through and winning the game. Alright, I'll go ahead and put down the Gilded Glaive now, or put down the Silverwing now. And I think we'll probably just put a Gilded Glaive on Silverwing Familiar. Looks like it'll be pretty fun. Now, because we've played something for 1-on-1, 2-on-2, and 3-on-3, and my opponent hasn't played anything, he's just kind of wasting his power at the moment, that means that I have a pretty significant advantage in the early game. I know from his colors that he's playing something very slow and controlling, and if I can push through and win the game early, I'll have a really good chance of beating him down. So there's 2 ways I can do this. I can play Gilded Glaive and spend all of my power, which is not a bad idea, but I'm kind of a little bit more interested in attacking with these 2 and playing Crownwatch Paladin. And there's a really specific chain of logic that goes with that. I'm expecting my opponent to play a card called Vanquish, which will, of course, deal with this once I put the Gilded Glaive on it, but I'm also expecting him to play Harsh Rule, which is a card that costs 5. So I want to do the maximum damage possible to him before he Harsh Rules, which it turns out might be difficult. Alright, so that is very likely to be a Harsh Rule turn. He appears to be setting up pretty well for that. I think we will not spend the power on the Gilded Glaive and instead just push in for some damage. And we're going to see if he has Harsh Rule or not. If he doesn't have Harsh Rule on 5, then we put the Gilded Glaive on and we go nuts. Opponent's waiting a little bit. Oh, looks like he's excavating his Lightning Storm. Well, that's one way to do it. Alright, so the next thing we want to play is Hero of the People. It's a card that should be very helpful here. It's got 3 power right now, which is just outside of Vanquish range and just outside of Lightning Storm. But my opponent still has a lot of possibilities that he can play. I think I'm just going to go for the Gilded Glaive here and swing in with a 10-10. And we'll hope that he doesn't have the Vanquish. Stronghold Visage is going to allow him to slowly regain power and health, so I really need to not get vanquished. But we'll see what we can do. Okay, so now I need to get to Rolant's Honor Guard, and that's where the card draw is particularly helpful. I'm going to go ahead and play down my power here. It would be really nice if I could Scorpion Wasp so that I could put in a piece of equipment on that, but I will settle for just playing another Rolant's. Alright, and we do hit our 7 drop. We have enough power to actually make that happen. So we get to play a nice big 6/6, and that should be very helpful for us. And that's very unfortunate, but not the end of the world for me. I think what I'm going to do here is put the Vodakhan staff on the Crownwatch Paladin, because when I hit 8 power, I will get Vodakhan staff back. So this should allow me to avoid any further problems with Lightning Storm. It does make me vulnerable to Vanquish, but it means that my Gilded Glaive will be much more powerful. And my opponent might be running out of removal spells at this point. We will see. No removal spell there, so we get to put 7 on here. That's 12 in the 12 attacking, which is quite good. He will probably have a Lightning Strike to pop the Aegis, but it's hard to say for sure. Alright, we get to push for 12 damage, and that Aegis is helping out quite a bit. Alright, my opponent has to dig for answers here. That's good news for me. I want to do more damage to him than what I've got currently going on now. Hopefully he doesn't have a way to remove the Crownwatch Paladin. If he doesn't, I believe this game is over. If he does, things could get really messy, because those 2 Stronghold Visages are going to allow him to regain a lot of health. He's using his Secret Pages, which is of course the card that you play when you are playing a heavy control deck. This card just allows you to get a ton of value out of your control. Alright, Staff of Stories extends his health, but doesn't actually protect him from lethal. Let's see, that's 16 that he's got. My Vodakhan Staff is a 4/4, so I make exactly 16 myself, and that'll be the game. So when it comes to tempo plays, playing to like the best stock mana possible is of course always a good way to get a lot of early advantage. My opponent just didn't have anything but late game cards. That ends up being a very helpful strategy if he can actually get to the late game, but we managed to put enough pressure on him with the Aegis units that it ended up not being a big deal. So with that, let's go to the Post-Mortem. So you saw that late game control deck running a lot of Secret Pages and other cards to make sure that it consistently drew power. And one of the things that actually really hurt that deck, one of the reasons that it lost that game, was because he missed a power drop. He had to play something on turn, he had to play an Excavate on turn 4 in order to get a Lightning Storm back, which ended up being a very powerful card, never you mind, but it also meant that he didn't actually get to play a power until the turn after that. And as such, he wasn't able to get to his late game until later in the game when I was already at a commanding position and had put out most of his cards that were actually useful to him. Later in the game, that deck can take control with cards like Eye of Winter, cards like Channel the Tempest, other stuff like that. But since we played our turns efficiently and we made sure that we always had the power that we needed to play our threats, we were able to take command of the early game and push through for the final amount of damage. And that's a level of consistency to our plan that really, really helps. So we've talked a lot about how it's important to have a plan, but consistency is what separates good plans from, or good decks from bad decks. Essentially, the more consistently that you can execute on your strategy, the more likely you are to win more games, which is what gets you up to the level of Master or to the level of Diamond or wherever it is that you're aiming on the ranked ladder. So if you can win more games with your decks, if you can execute on those strategies more consistently, that really helps a lot. And as a result, it's important to pay attention to cards on the curve. Because sure, you can play a deck that runs a lot of 7 and 8 cards that only has 25 power and isn't likely to see those 7 and 8 cards unless it gets really, really lucky. But as a result, you'll be left waiting more often than not. You won't have as good a time with your deck because honestly, it's just not going to do what you want every time that you want to do it. So to that extent, always look at the curve of your deck. Think about how much power you're expending each turn. Whether or not you can consistently play something on each of the early turns, which is usually very, very important. And also whether or not you have the power to support the cards that you are running later in the game. In this case, we don't have a lot of late game. We have a lot of early game and we have a lot of 3-drops, but we know that we can get to those 3-drops because we play an exceptional amount of power. And we deal with the flooding problem by sinking that extra power into cards like Awakened Student and Vodakhan's Staff, as well as a couple of late game threats like Rolant the Iron Fist. So we know where our power is going, and understanding that is a key to getting good decks going in Eternal. If you want to test this out more, the thing that I recommend to you is after building a deck, make sure that it has, an appropriate amount of power for your curve. Aggressive decks usually run around 25, control decks usually run around 29 to 30, and often use more in the form of secret pages or secret pages and seek power, and other ways to actually get more power to especially support their deck. But get the amount of power that you think is appropriate. And then use this awesome button right here, the sample hand. This will show you a sample hand that you can draw. And if it looks like a hand you can play, redraw it. And keep doing this a couple of times. Just get a feel for how many good hands you're getting in your deck. Because if you are not getting enough power in those hands, or if you're getting too much, it's pretty easy to make that adjustment even before you start playing. And as a result, dramatically increase the consistency of your deck. I think that's all I have for now, so keep an eye on those curves, make sure that you're seeking out all of the power that you deserve, and yeah, run this card. It's really good, guys. It's really good. Okay, feel free to like or subscribe if you want to. Thank you for watching. I will be back with another Eternal Basics. I'm not sure about the next one, but it should be up probably within a week or two. So, thanks so much, and have a good night.